Here's where we talk about the skills that help pay the bills. Stick around. Hi, folks. Old Man Grognarde here. And today I want to talk about skills and skill systems in role playing games. And this is mainly going to be about like fantasy, only because there's a lot of modern role playing games, Supers, GURPS, Hero, Savage Worlds, Star Wars, you name it, that have the skill system built in, and it's part of the game. It's pretty much half the mechanics in a game. So I'm not going to deal with those because those are what they are. That's how you play the game. I'm talking about like skills in a fantasy setting like D&D. Mostly D&D because that's what it got me thinking of. Because since I've been back in the OSR, that's mainly what I've been playing. Some variant of D&D mostly. So I'll give you we'll talk about the history a bit. In the original Brown books of D&D, there were no skill system. They were dealing with adventurers, pure and simple, and I can appreciate that. There are many times when I've not thought about it. I'm an adventurer. I'm going to go out and delve the dungeons. This is how I make my living now. But when I got into the hobby, when I was in the hobby for any length of time, it started bothering me because what do these people do before they decided to go out and adventure? They must, even if they didn't practice their profession, say they were late in the game or whatever, they decided to do this, they've been maybe establishing a profession and they decided to do this. Even if they didn't do that, they were trained in something from birth. They've been trained, they have certain skills outside of the adventuring skill set that could help the adventuring skill set. So skill systems in a fantasy game like D&D, to me, I always it was a love-hate relationship because of what I went through in second and third edition, and I'll get to that in a minute. Anyway, the first skill system I ever saw was in this bad boy. If we remember the chart in the first edition DMG, you know the chart. That one right there, secondary skills and abilities. And it says below the chart there, when secondary skills are used, it is up to the DM to create and or adjudicate situations in which these skills are used or useful to the player character. In other words, the DM has to figure it out. Thanks, Gary. From what I understood, though, I understood that there was going to be something of a secondary skill system, but they just didn't. They didn't have the time or they didn't have the room in the book to put it. And so they never elaborated on that. But I find out later that in I don't know about BX, but in Menser Beckme, there is a skill system which they carried over to the Rule Cyclopedia. And this skill system I like because it falls under categories, the category of what I think a good skill system should be. I think a skill system should be basic and unobtrusive. And I feel that when I mean unobtrusive, I mean it gives you some pluses to whatever situation it is that applies, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what those pluses are or how you get them or what they're based on or anything like that. All skills, to me, should be based on those 6 stats you have. And those should be the defaults. Then we get into second edition. Proficiencies. Now, I know this started in Unearthed Arcana for first edition and things like that, or Oriental Adventures, those books, or one of the survival guides. I forget which one. I think it's Unearthed Arcana. But you've got the skill slots and the skill proficiencies, and you get so many when you start, which is okay. That's what they do in the Rule Cyclopedia. But they take it a step further, and they get this big old freaking chart, which I don't have a picture of, where it's okay, they're based on the 6 stats. That's good. But then they go, okay, this is a skill set of this set, and this is, it defaults to this skill at minuses or pluses or whatever. And it took it was like too many steps. Too many steps. I like the skill system in the rules cyclopedia because it's nice and simple. It gives you pluses to whatever the hell you're doing if it applies to the situation. You do get slots like proficiencies, but it's easier to manage. Weapons now I'll get to weapons in a minute, but I find that easier to manage, and you can get better at your skills by putting more slots into it. You don't need to have all these prerequisites. I haven't looked at them real close, but for most part, you don't need prerequisites for stuff like this. It's just you have the skill or skills, and that's it. It's not a big thing, and it's optional. Like there's a word in second edition that people mostly miss called optional. Now the proficiency system is optional, which that's good. But some people forget that and think you have to do the weapon and non-weapon proficiencies. Okay, weapons, weapon proficiencies, weapon skills, whatever you want, weapon mastery in the RC. I don't like them. The weapons mastery in the rule cyclopedia is way too complicated. I mean, you get these great buffs and everything like that, but it's hard to keep track of. They made it simpler in Dark Dungeons because they had actually devoted a whole chapter with individual things where you could find out which weapon, if you want to get better at it, proficient at it, master it, or whatever, you can find what you do right there in a column, not this two-page spread with like minuscule, fonts and things like that. It just got too unwieldy, was what I'm saying. Weapon proficiencies in 2E, by the same token, are also, which is also optional. It's good that you have that, but as far as weapon proficiencies and things like that, also another thing, I don't believe that classes should be penalized for using a weapon. And what I mean by that is, I don't think that, in like second edition, for example, the fighter or the rogue or whatever, they have to take proficiencies to even know how to use certain weapons. That flies with me for, say, exotic weapons, but I never want to be I never want to see a DM take the position of, if you don't have it, you can't do it. Because that's what I'm saying on those. I'm saying that if it gets to be too much, this is why I like to keep them simple and unobtrusive. It gets to be the mindset of, you don't have it, you can't do it. Which is not true. You can always try something. You may be at minuses for it, but you can try something. And as far as I'm concerned, I think it's a little too complicated to have every class have to be proficient in a weapon to use it. Unless it's, like I said, an exotic weapon that nobody has seen much. I mean, usually stuff like whips and bolas fall into that category. And yeah, I'd probably have a skill like weapon familiarity on certain things. If you want to take a general weapons familiarity skill, that's fine. If you have to have a class know a weapon, if you want to make it specific. I mean, Tunnels and Trolls have got it right with their talents, because they say could either be tight or narrow, and tight or loose, or wide or loose, tight, whatever. But you get the point of where you don't, you know how to use a sword generally, but you're really good at the bolas because you know those specifically, so you take a specific talent for that. So, I like it loosey-goosey that way as far as skills go. And weapon skills, I really don't like using them. I just don't. I mean, if you're gonna do that, I would rather give the bump to the class rather than have the skill. Fighters getting more out of their sword and armor, I can understand that. Thieves are better at backstabbing, so with certain weapons that lend themselves to backstabbing, daggers, short swords, pikes, dirks, whatever, you get a plus on that. That's where I'd like to put that as far as weapons skills go. And like I said, and skills skill systems, I think, are great as long as they're kept light, loose, and in the background. That's the whole thing. I'm not saying you can't get better at stuff either, because there are provisions, say in the RC, how to get better at something if you want to, like I said, put more slots into it. So anyway, and like I said, 2E it started to get complicated. 3E it got real complicated. 4E I haven't even looked at. 5E has kind of eased up on that somewhat. They've got other, I mean, there's other things that bother me about 5E that I don't want to get into, but the skill system is not one of them. There are other subroutines that I could complain about, but I'm not going to. Anyway, that's my take on skill systems. I think they're, like I said, I think they're great as long as they're light, loose, and unobtrusive to the overall scheme of things. You're still adventurers, but if you were a cook before you became an adventurer, I should give you a skill pluses on cooking a meal. Or if you're a what do they call us, horseman before you were an adventurer, I'll give you pluses on stuff like animal handling and things. Take a skill in animal handling and just leave it at that. That's not going to come up every day. Neither is cooking. But and that's the point where you got to judge it. That's what DMs are for. Anyway, that's my take on skills. And if you want to fight about if you want to talk about it, and you want to deal with talk to me about it, how do you deal with your skill system? That would be very interesting. oldmangrognarde@gmail.com. If I could probably elaborate this if you send me something on it. I'll probably elaborate on my After Dark show. But that's about it for now, and I will see you guys next time. So until then, bye-bye.